I want to introduce you to a productivity hack that I use every day. It's similar to snippets in a code editor to quickly template a piece of code, and then with a few simple keystroke commands to then have that template be pasted into the code editor itself. So take that technology and imagine that being used everywhere. And that's where Phrase Express comes in. It's a text expander and auto text software, and you can read more about it at phraseexpress.com. With Phrase Express, I use it as a developer. I use it a lot in my development, not necessarily in a code editor, but I do use it in SQL Server Management Studio, which doesn't have a text expander or snippet option. But in like IMs, emails, in documents that I'll write, I'll use it a lot. As an example, I'll bring up Notepad, and in the code editor, let's say I did need a lorem subtext, I could easily just do QQ lorem. Now that QQ lorem is my personal custom command that I set up, but it'll automatically paste a lower ipsum text in case I needed to do a mock for an HTML template. Now in IMs or in chats with colleagues and stuff like that, I do have a couple commands that I'll have, like I have QQLOL, which creates this little ASCII character. I also have QQIDK, which I'll have another one. But you can set this up any way you want. And if there's if there's a particular template that you typically will need in order to carve like an email or a memo, you can set it up as easy as you like. So let me show it slowly again. I'll do QQ, which is something that I have choose specifically because for me, I use QQ as my trigger because I figured I would never type in those particular key combinations, QQ, by accident and then accidentally trigger an execution. And for several years since I've used Phrase Express, that hasn't happened. So far so good. So I have QQLOL and then QQIDK and then QQ lorem. There's a whole bunch, but just for demo purposes, I'm just explaining those three. In SQL, there'll be certain queries that you'll have to commonly type in rather than opening and pasting those queries or just writing them on the fly. It's a lot quicker for me to just put in certain, using Phrase Express, certain key commands to just bring up the query automatically and then hit F5 to execute. One of them, for example, is let's say I need to find product information, which is very common for my job. I'll quickly just do, unlike the generic ones, I don't use QQ as my trigger combination. I'll do SQL prod. And you could set up Phrase Express to execute the command either automatically, like QLOL is automatic, but in my SQL triggers, SQL prod, nothing happens until I press the enter key, which is kind of nice. And then here it automatically creates the query, and then I can easily just do where product ID equals 5 and then hit F5 and execute it. So it comes in handy when I have to write this query a lot. And this is typically common, and sometimes I may need to expand on to that query, but being able to just quickly go like that and automatically have the query just typed in there helps a lot. And this, I mean, you can customize this any way you want. So I have SQL prod avail, which brings up the query for product availability. And then the last thing I'll use Phrase Express with is for credentials. And you have to be careful with this, but I'll do this in a very controlled environment and a very secure environment. As an example, sometimes if you work in a company setting, sometimes the credentials are pretty complex. You either open up in Notepad anyways or some sort of text editor or in any file where if it's not a browser, so let's say you have to type in credentials into RDP or some sort of software that is not a web browser, you couldn't use any password management extension to Chrome like LastPass. In those areas, I'll use, for example, I have command, I think I still use QQ, so it's QQ70U, where 70 is basically the last two digits of the IP address, and then U is the username. and then QQ70P would be the password. So those, I use Phrase Express to quickly just put in username and passwords to certain server access and certain software that I need to use. Now, a quick hack in terms of that is that sometimes, let's say you did have an application up that then prompts you for a username and password. Sometimes Phrase Express, if you type in the key combination, it may not auto detect that and then fill in either the username or password in those fields. A quick hack for that is typically you'll have a web browser open either on a second monitor or even on the same monitor. And what I'll do is quickly at the top, I'll just do the command there and then copy and then paste that into the credential fields. QQ70P, get the password there, and then paste that in the password field. Quickly show you how I set things up in Phrase Express is it's pretty simple. You'll have your command, your description, which will show up here, but then you'll have the auto text. So for this one, it's QQ lorem. I have it executed immediately. As the auto text command gets entered in, it will fill it in with this particular content. So the SQL ones, I have it executed after a delimiter. I never mess with anything, so I assume the default is the enter key, but I'm pretty sure you could change that out if you wanted to be like the space bar or something else. Some of the other options is execute after manual confirmation. I don't necessarily know about that. I don't really mess with that. I just dealt with these two. So execute immediately, where once you automatically type in the trigger, it automatically will expand the text. Execute after default delimiter, where you type in the command to trigger it and then you press enter to then have the text expand. And then of course you can always color code each of the triggers for organization purposes. But essentially that's basically it with Phrase Express. It's been very, very helpful for my day-to-day job. So I highly recommend, if you really like this software, to go ahead and pay for it. Hopefully this helps everybody. Thanks.